The hidden rules. Rich families teach their kids that nobody else hears about. You didn't know it at the time, but the moment you picked up that dinner fork, your real financial education had already begun. Not the one from textbooks, not YouTube, not Reddit threads at midnight. The one certain families have been quietly passing down for generations, in sentences so casual, so offhand, you almost miss them entirely. About a world of money that most people will never know exists. Nobody announced it. Nobody handed you a syllabus. But somewhere between the wine being poured and the conversation drifting aside, almost imperceptibly, from my weekend plans to a company acquisition, you felt it. A current beneath the surface. A language using all the same words you knew, but meaning something completely different. You had married into this family 6 months earlier. Small ceremony. Her parents smiled. Warm, generous, completely disarming. You thought you understood money. You had a 401k. You read the subreddits. You knew what compound interest was. By any normal measure, you were financially literate. You had absolutely no idea. It started with something small. A throwaway comment from her father over breakfast one Sunday. He was reading the paper, an actual paper, and without looking up, he said, "The Hendersons are going to lose that property if they keep treating equity like income." You nodded. You had no idea what it meant, but you filed it away. Because something in his tone told you it mattered more than he was letting on. That was the first clue. Wealthy families don't announce lessons. They embed them in sentences. Casual, offhand, almost forgettable sentences. And if you're not paying attention, if you didn't grow up learning to pay attention, you miss them. Every single time. Her mother was the sharper edge. Quiet, elegant, the kind of woman who could dismantle a business plan with a single raised eyebrow. One afternoon, she was reviewing something on her laptop and you asked what she was looking at. She turned the screen toward you without hesitation. A family trust document, 47 pages. She said, "We review this every 3 years. Do you know why?" You didn't. She said, "Because the law changes, and the law is always written by someone who wants something." You sat with that sentence for a long time. You had grown up in a house where money was anxiety, discussed in hushed tones, or not at all, where every financial surprise was a bad surprise. Your parents weren't irresponsible. They worked hard, paid their bills, did everything society told them to do, but they operated entirely inside a system they never once questioned. They trusted their employer with their retirement, the bank with their savings, the government with their future, not out of naivety, out of exhaustion. Nobody had ever shown them another option was possible. Her family didn't trust anyone. That sounds sinister. It isn't. It's actually something else entirely. It's the recognition that every financial product, every institution, every smiling advisor exists first to serve itself. And once you understand that, once it's woven into how you see the world, you stop being a consumer of the financial system. You become a participant, a conscious one, and that changes everything. The second thing you noticed was how they talked about assets, not in the abstract, in the specific. At her grandmother's birthday dinner, 83 years old, sharp as a blade, pearls, perfect posture, the conversation turned to a piece of land the family had held for decades. Someone mentioned an offer that had come in. Her grandmother put down her fork, slowly, and she said, "We don't sell things that produce, we sell things that cost." Nobody explained that sentence. Nobody had to. The entire table already understood it. And you sat there realizing that in 30 years of life, you had never once heard an adult in your family make that distinction. Not because they didn't care, because no one had ever taught them to see it. You were watching in real time the transmission of a philosophy, not a tip, not a trick, a philosophy. The kind that, once it's in your bloodstream, rewires every decision you make for the rest of your life. You started keeping notes, quietly, in your phone, after dinners and family calls and casual conversations that felt ordinary, but weren't. Every sentence that landed differently than it should have. Every comment that made you feel like you'd caught the edge of something enormous. Never let your accountant and your lawyer work separately. Her uncle at a barbecue, talking to her cousin who just started a business. The first thing you do with new money is nothing. For 90 days, nothing. Her father, after a property sale closed. If you can't explain exactly how someone is getting paid in a deal, you're the one getting paid for. None of these were dramatic. None were delivered with weight or ceremony. They were said the way you'd remind someone to check the weather before a road trip. Obvious, routine, assumed. That was the thing that was cracking your brain open. The assumed part. Because all of it, every single piece of this, was assumed. It was background radiation in their world. Kids absorbed it at dinner tables, on car rides, at family gatherings, before they were old enough to know they were learning anything. By the time they reached college, they already had an operating system running underneath everything. A framework for how money actually works, separate from and far more sophisticated than anything any school would ever teach. And everyone else, everyone who didn't grow up in that environment, was handed a completely different curriculum. Budget your income, build an emergency fund, don't carry credit card debt, contribute to your 401k, get a good job. These aren't wrong. They're just the ground floor. And while one group of kids was being shown the ground floor existed, another group was already being walked through the architecture of the entire building. That gap doesn't close on its own. It compounds like interest, but in reverse. Every year, without the framework becomes harder to build because the decisions that shape your financial life, where you put your money, how you structure your assets, how you think about risk, whether you even read the contract, those decisions are being made whether you're educated or not. The only question is whether you're making them or someone else is making them for you. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening that had no reason to be significant. You were sitting in the study with her father. He was going over something for the family's investment entity. Not a fund, not a portfolio, just a structure that held everything. He asked if you wanted to understand how it worked, not as a test. Genuinely, you said yes. He spent about 2 hours walking you through it. Why certain assets lived inside the entity and others didn't. How the entity connected to the trust. How the trust was designed to move wealth without triggering specific events. How legal ownership, beneficial ownership, and control could all be different things, held by different people for entirely different reasons. At some point, you asked him when he had learned all of this. He looked genuinely confused by the question. He thought about it for a moment, then he said, "I don't know. I just always knew it. My father talked about this constantly. It was just around. No arrogance in it. He said it the way you'd say you don't remember learning to read. That automatic, that early, that deeply embedded. And you sat there in the quiet of that room and felt something you hadn't expected to feel. Not envy, something heavier. Grief almost, for the version of yourself that had been working so hard inside a system you barely understood, making decisions with incomplete information, not because you were careless, because no one had ever told you the room existed. Here's what you know now. The wealth gap is real, documented, debated endlessly. But underneath it, there's a quieter gap almost no one talks about. A knowledge gap, a cultural gap. The difference between families where certain conversations happen and families where they never do. And this gap is more durable than the wealth itself. Because you can lose money, fortunes collapse, families fall apart, but the framework, the way of seeing, the assumptions, the questions you know to ask, that survives. And wherever it lands, it starts rebuilding. The families who stay wealthy across generations aren't just lucky. They're transmitting something carefully, consistently, across dinner tables and car rides and comments that sound throwaway until you understand they never were. You are not owed access to that transmission, but you are not locked out of it either. The Notes app on your phone now has 263 entries, each one a sentence, a principle, a question someone asked that you wish you had thought to ask first. You read them the way her grandmother reads trust documents, slowly, looking for what changed, looking for what you missed, because the system doesn't punish ignorance out of cruelty. It just doesn't wait for you to catch up. And the single most important thing you've learned, the one that sits at the center of all of it, is this. The wealthy don't just have more money, they have more clarity about what money is, what it isn't, and exactly who it's working for at any given moment. And clarity, unlike money, has no inheritance tax. You can start building it tonight.